and welcome to the LA Venture Podcast. This is Minnie Ingersoll, host of the podcast and partner at 10110. 10110 is a seed stage fund here in LA. All opinions expressed on this show by me and my guests are solely our own. Marcos Gonzalez is the founder and managing partner at VamosVentures. Based here in downtown LA, VamosVentures is an early stage venture fund focused on tech companies led by Hispanic and diverse founders. Before this, Marcos was twice in private equity, once a founder, and he grew up here in LA. Marcos, nice to see you, and congratulations on building VamosVentures.
Great. Thank you, Minnie. Thank you for the introduction and the invitation to be on this podcast. Great.
No, it's been fun getting to know you. So maybe if we just start with the basics of, how long has Vamos been around, and what are you doing?
Sure, absolutely, Minnie. So VamosVentures is a new fund. It's a first-time fund. The idea kind of came about in the year 2015, 2016. So it's something that I've been working on for a while. As you said, we focus on diverse teams. So we have an emphasis on Latinx entrepreneurs, but really it's pretty broad. So we look at entrepreneurs who come from underrepresented areas. So African American, women, veteran, disabled, LGBTQ, et cetera. So that's where we are.
And you're writing checks now. You're actively investing.
We have started to invest. So it's 100 or 500,000 is the range, but I think we'll be doing more on the 250 side of things. And then follow-on investing, check sizes will be $500,000 and above.
Great. And super needed. I'm glad you're here in LA. Do you know what % of LA is Hispanic?
Yeah, it's certainly over 50%.
That's what I thought. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, and if you, being good former business school students, we look at the data in terms of like cohorts, and we look at 65 and above, and 40 to 60 and so on. That number changes, and certainly when you look at the older demographic cohort in this city, it's a lot lower percentage Hispanic. But when you look at 18 and below, it's clearly over 50%. And if you look at 5 and below, so kids and going into kindergarten, it's probably something, I would bet, something around 70, 75%.
Wow.
It's a heavily Hispanic county.
Yeah.
Certainly city.
Yeah. And I knew it was very high, but I didn't know it was that high. And the U.S. as well. I mean, it's not 50%, but it's a huge percent, I think, of the United States. I don't know the number. Maybe you do.
Yeah, no, from a U.S. perspective, I do. It's approximately 19% of the U.S. population.
Yeah. It's
the largest, minority group in the country. And it's super high growth. One of the data points that we throw out from time to time is that, every month, 80,000 Hispanics turn 18. For the first time ever in the UC system-wide, Hispanic students were the largest group of students entering the UC system. So if you think about Asian, Caucasian, African-American, Hispanic, it's never been the largest. It's been creeping up. But This last year, the number of admitted students, the largest demographic group was Hispanic students in the UC system.
Well, good for us. I mean, I'm not Hispanic, but good for California, good for the Hispanic community. I didn't know that at all. So staying on this topic, it's interesting to me as an investor. Obviously, it's a young demographic, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Anything else that you think about when you sort of put your investor hat on in terms of consumer behavior or whatever?
Yeah, there's a number of points. It's kind of stepping back a little bit. VamosVentures is a early stage VC fund. Some might say micro VC fund, right? $25 million is where we're at right now. We're probably going to end up at about 27 million. But there's plenty of funds like this. And I always tell folks when we go through the data that this is why it's an interesting area from an investor perspective. And it's just a happy coincidence that we happen to be Hispanic and we happen to know it and have access to it. And so there's two of these points, right? One is from an investor perspective, one's from an impact. And I'm mentioning that because these are the two categories that I'll get to now with some data. And so on the investor side, not only is it young, so 28 is the average age of Hispanics in the country, 42 for non-Hispanic. So that's a pretty big difference. So you're looking at runway, right? You capture a customer at a young age, you got runway to work with. So, it's especially young in high growth, and I told you the 80,000, a month number, and that's 92% driven by domestic growth. This is not immigration, growth. So it's domestic driven. So that's going to continue for a good while. 60% of future growth in the United States is attributable or projected to be from the Hispanic demographic. Wow. So we're looking at 18%, 19% of U.S. Is Hispanic today, but in the next 20 to 30 years, we'll be reaching something around 28%, and that's over a quarter of the country. So that's huge. But what's more interesting is that from a consumer perspective, buying and brand loyalty is over-indexed when it comes to Hispanic consumers. So what we're looking at VamosVentures is how do we identify opportunities that play to these demographic trends. So one of the areas we're looking at is consumer packaged goods in the whole CPG tech world.
Is most of that population natively English speaking, natively Spanish speaking, bilingual? And does the way that you reach them, does it have dramatically different, channels and cost of acquisition?
So really interesting, good questions, Minnie. So the breakdown in terms of language, I can give you the specific numbers, but roughly for anybody listening, and for you, it's roughly a third, and a third. A third is English dominant, very little Spanish, if any. A third is Spanish dominant, understands some English, can probably figure out some directions if they need to, but they're Spanish dominant. And then a third is completely bilingual.
In consumer broadly, I think people are always talking about how hard, cost of acquisition is going up. And so, is that the same in the Hispanic community or different?
Some of the ways are very traditional ways that, we would use on any consumer. But, the Hispanic demographic, much like the African-American one, is very tech savvy. Right? So the Facebooks, the Google ads, the social media, channel, whether it's Snap or, it's absolutely critical to reaching this consumer group. One of the data points I didn't throw out is that every year the number of Hispanics receiving STEM-related degrees is doubling. A lot of these young folks with STEM degrees are going to be getting into the engineering world and innovation and entrepreneurial world. That's a great indicator of the future.
Yeah. Do you think, like, for these brands, do you think it's like developing a whole new brand for this market, or do you think it's, modifying messaging around, existing products, or how do you sort of think, where do you think the breakouts will come from?
I think it's going to be both, Minnie. But I would rather not. I would rather focus on new brands or existing brands and giving them a makeover. So, for example, chips, right? So everybody knows tortilla chips, right? And who doesn't have tortilla chips right now in their house somewhere, or in the last month had them in their house, right? And so everybody does it. But here's a new company we saw the other day, and this company is focusing on formulation, and they're using cactus to develop their product that's much more healthy. It's a different ingredient that's better for you versus all the processing that goes through, the whole corn-based, maize-based, tortilla chip. And these guys are all young guys and gals who grew up, either here with Mexican parents or in Mexico, know the community, know the consumer, and have a reference for the product. But also know that if you want to see kind of this, there's opportunities for new growth of new product, keeping, the cultural side of it.
And I feel justified in peppering you with all these questions, because my understanding is before this, you did private equity for a while, focus on the U.S. Hispanic market. Tell me more about what were you doing? Like, what was the actual job? Like, were you acquiring companies? What does private equity do? I still don't know.
What are you up to? For you mentioned I'm from Los Angeles, but I left at a young age, and I did Brown undergrad, and then business school at HBS, like you did, And after that, I got into BCG, and I worked at the Boston Consulting Group and did a lot of work in the U.S. and Latin America. And I lived in Mexico for a while. I lived in Buenos Aires for a while, and in the U.S. for BCG. And of course, we looked at consumer packaged goods, clients, and I eventually got into private equity. And within private equity, one of my roles, the last role I had in the private equity world, was looking at the U.S. Hispanic consumer opportunity. And for us, it was kind of a dual view of looking at companies that were established brick and mortar businesses that were run by Hispanic entrepreneurs, or any company with any ownership that was servicing the growing domestic emerging market known as the U.S. Hispanic market. In the private equity world, as you know, and for folks that are listening, it's very similar to venture capital. There's some major differences, of course. Some of the major differences are that you're looking at companies that are a lot more established, have grown already, are more brick and mortar than they are technology and software driven. But I got to know the food and beverage world. And to be honest, Minnie, this was not a priority area for me in VamosVentures. And that's not why I started VamosVentures. But it's clear to me that that's a meaningful opportunity for us in the venture world, because 10 years ago, we didn't have the kind of, consumer targeting capabilities that we have today. We didn't have the broad, outreach, opportunities that we have today. It's really an interesting opportunity to focus on this area and CPG.
Let me ask one question. So I think a lot of people find VC a little bit more inspiring, or something like you're creating something, you have a vision. But what do you think VC can learn from private equity?
I think that one thing is that you have got to not get carried away with some ideas. And in the private equity world, there's a lot of tire kicking that goes on. Mm-hmm. And you have plenty of tires you can kick. In the VC world, you don't have a lot of, depending on what stage, and we're talking about early stage, there aren't a lot of tires you can kick, but certainly there are some. One of the things that we can learn there is that mature teams are also good. Thoughtful business, analysis and strategy is worth something. Kicking the tires and really kind of doing some diligence, not getting carried away with, the latest fad and the latest idea that's coming out of Silicon Valley, I think is a good thing to stay away from that and have a suspicious eye.
I think that you are going a different direction than most of the VCs I talk to. And I'm not disagreeing with you, but I just had Mark Suster on the podcast, and he said that almost all of the deals they're doing now, where they're writing a $3 to $5 million check, they are pre-revenue companies. And I think you actually, according to your website, it says we prefer companies with revenues.
Yeah, sure. And Mark, obviously very successful here in not just here in Los Angeles, but a successful investor, and that's great. We will invest in companies that are, let's just say, CPG tech companies. And if you don't have even $5,000 in revenue, then we're not maybe going to say no, but we're going to absolutely, create a different structure to invest in it. The fact that so many investors in the very early stage are basically safe agreement, signers. Mm-hmm. That's fine, but the world that I come from that's not what you're paid for. We're investors, and that means we do deals. We don't sign agreements. We do deals. So going back to VamosVentures and the VamosVentures story, when you go out to start a fund and raise money for a strategy that 4 years ago was not that popular or well known. Hey, we want to raise money to invest in diverse teams with a focus on Latinx. People would look at me like I had two heads on my shoulder. They're, what are you talking about? I don't know any founders and entrepreneurs. Is this a pipe dream? And so I realized early on, I'm going to have to do some deals and show a pipeline, show that we have access, show that we can pick some, we can add value, and they can be successful. And so I invested in about 6 companies.
You said something on someone else's podcast that I liked, but I want you to unpack it for me, which is you said there's a difference between being a fund manager and an investor.
Yeah, for sure.
So tell me what you mean by that.
I'll say that I receive calls and emails often from mostly younger men and women who aspire to be, a venture capitalist.
Mm.
And that's their words. And, they'll say, hey, Marcos, I'd love to talk to you. I'm so-and-so, and, I want to, invest in Latinx entrepreneurs, for example. And I'll say, great. Do you want to be an investor or a fund manager? And they'll say, well, it's the same thing. I say, well, no, it's not. I mean, if you want a fund, you're now a fund manager. And it's much more than it is writing a check, than just writing a check. If you want to be an investor, you take out your own checkbook, you write a check, you're an investor now. And that's great. But if you want to raise money from other folks and third parties, you're now a fiduciary and you're a business owner and you're an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And there are many parts to that business. And if you don't have experience in it, it's a tough business, right? First of all, I don't know anyone. I don't know many. Maybe you do. But if anyone's come on your show and said it's an easy business, I'd love to meet them. But it's a hard business, and I'll tell you, I've seen a lot of things happen in my own experience in the private equity world that have blown up, and how you deal with it. And I think if you haven't seen some of this and spent 10, 15 years, it doesn't have to be that long, but for me, it was 10, 15 years of listening to your senior partners tell you, Marcos, don't do that. Here's why. Hey, Marcos, do it like this. Here's why. Stuff you don't read in the textbook. But I also sometimes counsel to, hey, spend a couple of years, come work here, or be a summer, associate with us, or, do these things. And dig in and learn on somebody else's dime, even if it's our dime, and so you can get out to market and do that.
That's great, because I think you just said, come work here and you can learn on my dime. You are hiring, are you not? Do you want to say that on this show?
Yeah, we are. We're still building the team out, and we're looking for somebody right now who ideally is comes from a diverse background, is mid-levels, had a few years out doing deals as part of a fund, and coming at a pretty senior level, that'd be great. And we're also looking for somebody that's very junior.
That's great. I think you're setting up a lot of interesting sort of pipeline structures, which is great to see. I agree with you completely. Like, being a fund manager, it's not all that sexy. The 2 and 20 model, with the $20 million fund, $30 million fund, $50 million fund, it's still not that much.
No.
Anything else on Vamos? I don't want to leave the impression that you only do CPG, right? It's
right.
Pretty broad.
We don't. We made a decision early on to say, look, we're going to be pretty broad, but there's a handful of areas that we really like, we have experience in, and that we see a lot in our pipeline, and that's financial services, health and wellness, CPG, retail broadly, and media. And so Paladin is a company that I invested in some time ago. They're Chicago and New York based, funded by 2 women. And they created a marketplace for lawyers that either must or want to do pro bono work. And on the demand side, families and individuals that need legal help but can't afford it. And it's a great business. It's now raised 3 rounds of funding. We were part of the very first round, and they've done a lot of great work. And there's a real value proposition there to law firms, principally, which is, how do you get your attorneys to do pro bono work that they have to do efficiently and save their time, so that you can build them out at market rates. And number one. And number two, you use this to attract lawyers, because young lawyers today, they want to be engaged.
I love it. So tell me, like, VamosVentures, you had a cushy job, private equity is usually larger funds. This is a mission for you. I know you're from LA. So maybe take me back to childhood and how that's, how your journey to here.
I think there's plenty of venture capital, professionals out there that feel that it's a mission because of the type of work that we do. It certainly is for me, for sure. And I grew up here. I was born in El Sereno. I'm looking out the window right now and I see City Hall, and El Sereno is just beyond it. So I grew up there and born there. My siblings were 2, and my parents are from Mexico. My parents immigrated to this country in the 60s. They met here in Los Angeles, but my brothers, my sister, and I were all born in Los Angeles. And then at a young age, moved to Alhambra, which is just the very next, community, the very next city outside of anybody listening to this that knows LA, you take Huntington Drive East and eventually you go right into Alhambra and then Pasadena. But I went to Alhambra High, and I've always been part of this. I've always felt part of the city in a weird way, right? The East Side, the real East Side, is very Latino, right? Very Mexican, and have cousins, uncles, whatever, over in East LA, and myself, and our family in El Sereno, and kind of really grew up in that environment, in a Mexican house, in a Mexican neighborhood, et cetera. But when we got to Alhambra, it was a very different story. In Alhambra, we were probably one of the first Hispanic families on our block in Alhambra. And but in a matter of years, 3-4 years, it was all Hispanic. And it was really interesting to see in the high school that I went to, Alhambra High, public school, very large, it was half Hispanic, half Asian. That was my world, right? Very different than Brown, for example. But I remember, I grew up loving the city of Los Angeles, and my parents loved the city of LA, so they would take us everywhere in downtown to see, and they built the Bonaventure Hotel. We would go up and down the elevators. That was our weekend, event. And so, but when I got into Brown, they had an event on a Saturday or Sunday in Bel Air. And it was for all admitted students. And I remember clearly my dad and I driving down Wilshire in his truck. And I swear to you, I was 18 and driving down Wilshire and looking around and thinking to myself, where are we? I have never been anywhere in this part of the city. It was possible to grow up then in those days and be very sheltered. Mm-hmm. The original point is that I grew up here, I was born here, I love Los Angeles, but I would say that I love and identify with a particular part of Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. That is not a very broad piece of it necessarily. Nothing against the West Side, or the other valley. I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley, and I get it. We're not San Fernando Valley, but that's the part that I identify with.
I completely agree. I mean, I'm in the house that I grew up in right now. And I think it's a big trend actually in LA versus San Francisco. San Francisco, everyone moved to San Francisco to do entrepreneurship. I don't think you feel the same commitment to the community as you do when it's the community that raised you. Mm-hmm. And how did you, so your parents immigrated here. It's kind of the American dream. How did you end up, going to Brown? Were you just very academically focused?
I was very motivated. I was very ambitious young kid. And I wanted to do the best, and I wanted to be the best. And I thought, okay, where can I apply it? But it was my parents, completely American dream, super hardworking, super entrepreneurial, resourceful, tenacious, smart, common sense, stick-to-itiveness, frugal, everything you might find in an entrepreneur, they have. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of the reason why VamosVentures, it's when somebody tells me, look, Marcos, I don't think there's a pipeline for this, or I don't think there's any, Latinx entrepreneurs out there that can, I grew up around this. You cannot tell me that this doesn't exist. I've seen it, all my life. And, Peter Thiel is very famous of saying in his book, 1 to 0, or one of his articles about one of the questions that he asked.
0 to 1. I think 0 to 1.
You're right, 0 to 1. Maybe I'll come up with a book, 1 to 0. So maybe he'll write 1 to 0. But he asked the question, right, of what do you believe that others don't believe, or something like this?
Yes.
And early on, this came up in a discussion, and I said, yeah, I don't think most people believe that this community has amazing entrepreneurial talent, including in the tech world. Mm-hmm. And but I believe it, and I'm willing to bet on it. And I questioned myself many times, like, am I ruining my career and my life? That no, I have, I got to follow my instinct on this one, and that's what drove it.
I mean, immigrating is an extremely daring entrepreneurial endeavor. You say, oh, it's scary to start a company. Well, moving countries is a daring endeavor.
Absolutely.
And so now I've heard you, as I said, I heard you talk about what you're doing with the entrepreneurs who come and pitch you. You can't invest in all of them, but I think you're doing a lot of giving back to the community. How do you think about those ventures and what you want to be building there?
Yeah, it's really hard, I think. We're all investors, and we all have our number one priority is generating returns for our investors. And we're very clear on that. If you start a fund, as I did, to give energy and momentum to creative expression through entrepreneurship of entrepreneurs of color, if that's your mission, then how do you reconcile that with having to say no to 95% of the folks that come reach out to you? And they don't just reach out to you. They say things like, Marcos, I'm so happy to see what you're doing. Marcos, congratulations. Thank you for doing, this is amazing. Gosh, I've been telling you, by the way, I'm an entrepreneur. Here's what we're doing. And then what? Sorry, not for us.
Yeah. Or don't reply. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't reply.
Ghost.
Yeah. I mean, that's devastating. And also we got four things to do. One is we recognize everybody. It may not be the very day you email us. It may be a week or two later, but we'll recognize everyone who reaches out. It's not easy. And part of what we think adds value is that we see you and we recognize you. And number two, we provide feedback. If you want it, we'll give you feedback, honest feedback. Three, we'll make connections. If we know anyone that could help you on your journey, we will make the connection. And then four, you will have an open door. And if you want to come back, if you have other things you want to discuss, or you have a new company in the future, whatever it might be, we'd love to hear from you again. This is not a no, don't ever bother us again kind of situation. And we found that that's all great, but it's not enough. And so we developed a program called the Founders Roundtable. And, sorry, it's brand new. We're actually launching this next week. It's actually the Founders Roadmap. It's real, 0 to 1, 1 to 0. What's the difference? and so the Founders Roadmap, it's a monthly video fire chat discussion with a founder and an investor. And so we're going to talk about what works, what doesn't work from a lens of a Latina entrepreneur that has, started a couple of companies, has raised a couple of rounds in this last, company, and what works, what doesn't work for her. And then turns out, coincidentally, a Latina investor at a local VC fund, actually Clock Tower Ventures. So a friend of ours, Minnie, actually, Adriana, will be. And so this is a great, in my view, a really interesting opportunity to do several things. One is to promote these two young women, an entrepreneur and an investor, and give them a platform to articulate their personal brands. And then more kind of bricks and mortar or kind of brass tacks would be, what they look for, as an investor, what gets the immediate no.
Here's what I struggle with the most in terms of what gets an immediate no or yes. It's the founders, right? And the stage we're investing in, it's a lot about the founders. And I'm not great at giving feedback. Like, if the reason I'm not investing is because of you, that's a much harder thing than hiding behind sort of, I'm not investing because I don't believe in the tailwinds of the market. How do you think about giving meaningful feedback when it's a more personal sort of feedback?
This obviously comes up, and there's a particular example of a founder, and we had gotten to know each other and had developed a relationship. And so he was fundraising, and he was frustrated. He kind of expressed frustration. Then I said, "Hey, can I be really honest?" Sure. I said, "Well," and it was a very honest, personal. Feedback on attitude, on behavior, on the way you're the way you deal with folks. And nobody, I think, disputes that you're a smart guy. It's these other things. And honestly, people, this is not just, I'm going to write a check. It's somebody's thinking, do I really want to deal with this guy for 5 to 10 years?
Is there anything else I missed that you'd like to talk about? Otherwise, this is great.
Well, I would like to say, I know this is LA-based podcast and we're relatively new on the scene, but would love to just develop relationships and get to know local funds and investors and collaborate, over time and start the process of getting to know each other.
That's great. I'm excited for the enduring institution that you're building, and it's a very exciting time to be building what you're doing. So, so great. Thanks for being on the show, and thanks for doing your work.
You bet, Minnie. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. And I look forward to being in touch with you.
Thanks, Marcos.